This is a presentation of very emotional time in my life and my hysterical blindness in the face of torture in Africa. I've gone through a lot in my life, and this is kind of one of the hardest traumatic episodes. So I'm going to share it with you. And I've always found myself drawn to danger, often against my better judgment, compelled to push boundaries and adventures, safety, discovery, and goodness. Throughout my life, this tendency have led me to places and situations that others might wisely avoid, but I didn't. But the experience I had in remote Africa countries that I'm going to talk about today was profoundly unlike many others. It led to the kind of trauma that leaves an indelible mark on one's psyche, on my own psyche, an experience so terrifying that it quite literally blinded me for a time. I was in a country still clinging to remnants of British colonialism, staying in a sprawling, gorgeous mansion, and that you can see in the pictures. It felt cursed. It built on by a lord named Blackheart. He was a white man on a black new Zambia government. I was there with the parents of my friends Penelope. We were exploring this colonial relic. I was exploring the colonial relic, a place steeped in glory, fame, beauty, as well its own dark history. But I never imagined the darkness would soon descend upon me in such a personal and volatile, violent way. One afternoon, Penelope's father asked me to accompany him somewhere. I didn't know where it was. We drove for hours in silence, and suddenly he stopped in front of a very remote police station, turned me in without saying a word, and just left. I was bewildered, confused, and had no idea what was happening. The police didn't explain anything to me either. Instead, they handcuffed me, threw me at the back of an old, rusty pickup truck with two armed guards from the Zambia army. The guards sat in the back with me, playing with their automatic weapons, loading, unloading bullets as if they are going kind of in a twisted, crazy game with me. As we drove down the bumpy road for hours and hours, unpaved road which felt like days in my mind, I would see how careless and incompetent the guards were with their weapons, and I kept thinking, I could kill both of them right now by getting their weapons, that they weren't skilled in handling their own guns. And in my mind, I strategized way to overpower them, take control of the truck, and escape. But escape to where? It was in northern Zambia. I had no idea. I had no money, no identification, no idea where I was, how to get to the other country, how to get gas. There was kind of nowhere to go. Yet the urge to survive, to act, was overwhelming. The question gone with me kind of for endless hours. What's happening? Should I take over? Why did Penelope father took me there and left me there? After what seemed to be like eternity on this bumpy road, we finally arrived in an old, decaying, highly guarded prison in the middle of nowhere. There was no sign of civilization, just high fences, guard towers. The guards didn't say a word. They stripped me of my clothes in a small transition room, left me only nothing but a t-shirt and underwear, and threw me into 6 by 6 foot cell, like two meter by 2 meter cell, with three other Zambian prisoners dressed like me. The cell was so cramped and stinky, there was barely a room to sit. Definitely not a place to lay down. My cellmate did not speak English, and I couldn't make a sense of what was happening to me, to them, into the environment. There were bars on a small window near the top of the wall, offering a narrow, tiny glimpses of the outside world. Nightfall brought new kind of terror. As I sit there, leaning against the wall, I heard screams, blood, curdling cries of people being tortured next nearby in a nearby building. It wasn't just once or twice, it was relentless throughout the night, this screaming. The sound was so horrifying that I couldn't sleep, constantly on the edge, fearing that my cellmate may attack me. I fantasized about how I could defend myself. If it comes to that, thinking about how I would smash their three heads against the cement wall if they tried to do anything to me. They fed us porridge there, and I barely ate. My mind was consumed with fear and deafening sound of human suffering, of tortured. It felt like weeks have passed through it, and I had only been there for 2 days. One morning, they let us out into a small yard surrounded by barbed wires. The sun was blinding, and as I wandered in my daze, I walked straight into the barbed wire fence, cutting myself all over, bleeding. Then I suddenly, everything went white. I wasn't just blind, I was completely dissociated blind. In case of later I discovered that what really psychological happened to me, I was hysterically blind. It's a conversion disorder. I was hysterically blind. Unaware of at first that I lost my sight, as I learned later, it was as if my mind shut down to protect me from the trauma I was experiencing. I could hear people moving around me, but I couldn't see anything. At some point, a young prisoner, a fellow prisoner, took pity on me. He pulled me away from the barbed wire and gently held my arm, guiding me around the yard. I couldn't see him, but he seemed to me in my mind he was a young prisoner like me. Couldn't see a ground, couldn't see the drink he handed me. I never saw his face, but he was the only connection to reality in that hellish place. He helped me walk, helped me find some semblance of sanity in a world that has become unrecognizable, blindly insane. By night, continued to bring the same agonizing screams of torture. And by the end of the third day, I was sure I would be tortured next. My vision was still white, blinding void, and I stumbled around that yard barely during the day where I was. Then sometimes strange things happened. On the third day, I saw Penelope mother, my ex-girlfriend from London mother, where I visited the house, walking through the prison gate, holding a sack in her hand. I started shouting, I'm here, I'm here. But she didn't even acknowledge me or turn her head in my direction. For a brief moment, I felt a wave of relief that at least somebody in the world knew where I was. But the relief quickly turned to despair as she disappeared, leaving me once again in the hands of my captors. Later that day, they dragged me into a room, a torture room, confession room. They shackled me to a chair, bolted to the floor. My vision began to return in a blurred flashes. Two guards stood on each side of me, and five large African men, Zambian men in suits, sat on a raised flat platform, glaring down at me. One of them spoke in heavy accented English, asked me about my military service. I knew at that moment that I'm going to die. Zambia was in war with Rhodesia, the Israelis were involved. There was no doubt in my mind they brought me here to torture and execute me. The interrogation continued for what I felt hours. They knew I served in the army. They knew that I was a lieutenant in the paratrooper. They seemed particularly interested in my paratrooper experience in Israel. At one point, they realized that the single light in the room was shining directly on me. So they tried to adjust it the way they saw it perhaps in some really bad movies. And the guards move the light, but instead of focusing on me, it illuminates them, leaving me in the dark. So it was like they were in the light and I was in the dark. And I remember thinking, what a pathetic way to die. It was almost in my mind laughable in its absurdity. I smile because it was so idiotic. And they noticed and asked me, "Why are you smiling?" One of them asked me angrily. I was delusional, resigned to my fate, smiling with this pathetic scene. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the questioning stopped, the mood in the room shifted, and they got my shackle off, and one of them even ordered me a can of beer. I could not believe it. What was the transition? Was it kind of a sick joke? I drank the beer, still shaking, still terrified, unable to comprehend what was happening to me. They handed me the release paper that you can see. And within an hour, I was back on a truck towards the mansion where this nightmare had started. A mansion that I shouldn't have gone to. My belongings were already packed. When I arrived, and they gave me a ticket flying from the airport to Nairobi. I was free, but I couldn't grasp the freedom. At the airport, my paranoia persisted. I clearly heard my name called over the loudspeaker, and I was sure it was the last moment that they could take me back and nobody would have known, and I'll be go back to prison. So the people who gave me the ticket, the British thought that I'm on my way to Kenya, but I wasn't. So I saw a British fellow passenger sitting there, and I tried to write my name, and I couldn't write my name. I was so nervous. So he kind of ordered me two whiskeys without saying one word, the British way of treating something like that. And it didn't help. When I boarded the plane, I collapsed into my seat beside the man who offered me the whiskeys as my medicine. Still in disbelief, I was not until we were out of Zambia airspace that I began to relax, knowing I would be soon in Kenya, in Nairobi, a place where I had friends and I felt safe. I spent the next few weeks in gorgeous Amboseli National Park with my friend Keith, who was studying elephants. It was like the vastness of the Serengeti, the rhythm of nature, the quiet presence of the gorgeous elephant were healing. I felt safe there, away from the chaos and the terror and the blindness that gripped me for such a long, horrific days. As it turned out, the reason I was released was Penelope's mother had contacted Penelope's grandmother, Lady Brown Gore, the wife of Lord Blackheart. She was one I spent time in London a year earlier. Lady Brown Gore was a friend with the president of Zambia at the time, and she had pulled some strings to secure my freedom. To that day, I don't know why I was arrested, but I know that haven't been the same since in some regards. The blindness that overtook me in the prison may have a temporary shadow, but also a shadow left in my left eye and definitely on my soul.